The most recent episode of Doctor Who that's aired was the final episode of Jodie Whitaker, The Power of the Doctor. And this is a very odd story, largely because there's so many things happening and a lot of them seem very disconnected from each other. A lot of them jump in from seemingly nowhere and a lot of them never really go anywhere. And I think this is caused by one very clear issue, which is that basically I think that The Power of the Doctor was rewritten very heavily to remove any reference to Chibnall's ongoing plotlines, say the Timeless Child and the Doctor's origins, which I think heavily featured in the original draft of the episode. Now, I'm going to go into what I think the plot was originally, but it's interesting to think, why did this change? Did it change because the BBC said, no, you can't keep doing this Timeless Child stuff. It's making the show really insular. Or did it change because Chris Chibnall saw that a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about was starting to leak and it was getting bad reactions, and so maybe he thought, you know what, I'm not going to bother with this. I'm going to give the fans what they want, which is references to the classic series, etc. I don't know. It's one of those two, I think, but I guess until a definitive book has been written on the era, we'll never know why this happened. But I hope to be able to convince you that there was a very different format to this to begin with. Now, before we get started on what actually I think originally happened, what elements in the script didn't originally feature? Well, I don't think that the classic companions were in it originally. I'm unsure of whether the Daleks were in it originally. I don't think that the scene with the classic Doctors appearing existed. And I'm unsure of whether there was hologram Doctors. A lot of these elements could have been in the original script, but I'm not going to mention them in my summary because I feel like they probably weren't. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. You know, I don't think it really changes fundamentally the structure of the story, whether they were or not, but I would lean towards no. So, what do I think happened in the original script? Well, we open with the same train heist sequence where the Doctor, Dan, and Yaz go to save a child. Basically, this entire scene plays out exactly as we see on screen. Things start to change, though, when we arrive on the new moon of Earth, the cyber moon, because they arrive, they find the child, and they discover that the child is not a Quarynx. Instead, it's just a child. Vinder arrives, and Vinder says, hey, this child, not a Quarynx, is actually my daughter. The daughter that we hear him talking about in season 13. This provides a reason for Vinder to be there. I mean, Vinder doesn't really do anything in this story as broadcast, and I think he's basically there because he was in an original draft of the script, and then Chibnall decided, it would be neat to just have him still there, rather than him being added in later. What happens next is that the Master replacing the Doctor storyline maybe still happens. I'm unsure of this. Despite it being one of the main events in the storyline, I'm not entirely sure whether it was in the original script or not, but let's assume that it did. But he's using the child as an energy source because that child is filled with energy. And what is this energy? It's regeneration energy, because this child is the Timeless Child. Before they became the Doctor, before they went through the wormhole, the original Timeless Child. The Master's plan, therefore, is to either replace them rather than the Jodie Whitaker Doctor and replace the Doctor's entire timeline with the Master instead, or at least when he takes over Jodie Whitaker's body, all the energy from the Timeless Child passes into him and he receives infinite regenerations and basically becomes the Doctor. I think that it's quite likely that he was going to replace the child with himself or try and kill the child in some way, because of all this dialogue about how the Master basically talks about how the Doctor's entire existence will be wiped out in the final script. And I think this probably comes out of him discovering the Timeless Child and going, I'm going to kill you before you even became the Doctor. What happens next? Well, Jodie Whittaker has been incapacitated in some way. The Master has hold of her and the child. Yaz, again, is left alone in the TARDIS. But instead of looking for holograms, Yaz searches for help from a past Doctor, the Fugitive Doctor. And then we get to the scene where everything gets restored, Jodie Whittaker gets restored, the Master gets defeated. And in this scene, instead of it being a hologram of the Fugitive Doctor, it is actually her. And she defeats the Master. After this point, we have Yaz, Vinder, the Fugitive Doctor, and the Jodie Whittaker Doctor, all with the child who has now been saved. And they decide together that the child has to be sent through the wormhole. The Timeless Child has seen how great the Doctor is, both in the Fugitive incarnation and in Jodie Whittaker's incarnation, and is therefore inspired to become the Doctor in the future, and is sent through the wormhole, where we see the scene that we've seen in the Matrix flashbacks and in the earlier Timeless Child flashbacks, and is picked up by Tecteun and becomes the Doctor through, the story that was related in the Timeless Children. It's therefore basically a loop, like a temporal loop, where the Doctor saves their child self in order that they can grow up to become the Doctor. This kind of leads to the same kind of ending where the cyber planet is destroyed. Maybe Jodie Whittaker has to regenerate because of this, and everyone ends up in the same place. Probably Yaz and the Doctor have a similar sort of ending. And then the Doctor goes and regenerates on the cliff, as we've seen. However, there's a slightly different feeling to this ending. Because we've had this loop, it's an ending of the Doctor's story. We've seen their origins, we've seen how they started, and all of the Chibnall era storylines have been wrapped up. But almost to an extent, the entirety of Doctor Who has been wrapped up, because we've seen the Doctor's childhood, we've seen their origins. Almost the question of Doctor Who has been answered. As we've heard for various different rumours and leaks, there was an idea when this was being written that it might be the final episode ever and there might not be another showrunner afterwards. So this idea of wrapping up the show in a neat bow was obviously Chibnall's idea of how to send it off. Obviously, Jodie Whittaker still exists, still regenerates, and there's still a Doctor to continue, but all the plot lines have been wrapped up in a neat little bow. Probably the original script was a little different from this. There's probably various aspects that I maybe got slightly wrong or things that I missed out. I'm especially unsure of what the Master's role in this script would have been. It would have been to threaten the child Doctor and to threaten the Jodie Whittaker Doctor, but whether the entire forced regeneration thing would have happened, I'm unsure of. But generally, I think that I'm right on this, and I think that Chibnall just edited the script, adding in the Quaruncs instead of the Timeless Child, because of either fan backlash or the BBC saying, no, you can't answer forever the question of who the Doctor is. If we literally knew that Vinder was the Doctor's dad, I think that would rob the show a little bit of mystery. But I think this is what we would have had. I think we would have had the Doctor's dad standing with the Jodie Whittaker Doctor, the Fugitive Doctor, and them sending off the Doctor's child self into Gallifrey's history. Whether this would have been any good or not is probably up to yourselves to decide. I think it would have been probably a bit of a mess, but quite funny, or at least fun to watch. I'm hoping one day Chibnall will do an interview or release a script where he reveals that this is actually what he was up to. I hope I've convinced some of you that this probably was the original plan. Let me know in the comments whether you think that I was right about this, whether you have any suggestions of parts of the episode that I've missed out that tie into this or contradict it, or if there's anything else that you think would have been included in the original script.